that, we'll move on to our next speaker, Mr. Christian Pho Duc, Chief Technology Officer at SmartEnergy. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. Very great introduction to the topic already, and I will jump in with some slides which I cover only shortly as I deep dive only in some specific topics and then going into some details which hopefully will be very interesting with respect to MENA. SmartEnergy, just to say that we are a private investment firm in investing into renewable assets. Our history comes from large-scale PV, but we have engaged strongly into hydrogen since 2020 and focused since 2022-23 into the development also into SAF and eSAF projects in particular. I hope you hear me well, and then I go on the next slide just to set the scene a little as well. We have heard a lot about the various potential to do the fuels, the SAFs, but also looking into the total decarbonization target for aviation. I find this slide kind of helpful, showing that there is various elements getting aviation from 2019 level chosen before COVID down to the net zero ambition. And what becomes clear is that while there is an important part, which is altogether 50% kind of latest generation aircraft operations, disruptive technologies, market-based measures, the sustainable aviation fuels is the largest element of it. And as we deal about now MENA and Europe, how they may work together, very nice to know that the director of aviation of the DG Move, Philippe Cornelis, said, believing in aviation is believing in SAF, because it has to happen. Also nice to say, when I was in ICAO meeting in Greece, that was last year, that one of the main arguments I remember was really in the audience saying, well, the young people, and there were young people around, said, we don't want to restrict ourselves to fly. We want fly, but we want to fly clean. And the want word, I think, is a very important one, because we talk about, in the end, also the readiness to pay, or the price which will be paid at some point. But there is a demand, and the demand is increasing. We saw the passengers numbers, which would increase. We know 3% is aviation today, roughly, and it would increase. And it was also said, I think, by Dr. Mustafa, that it would increase 3 times to 9-10% if there wouldn't be the measures. Now, also looking into opportunity MENA to Europe and looking into the regions, and it's a bit a view on what is the pie, what is the part of the cake you get. And working with EU obviously has 2 big advantages. It's relatively close, plus it's a very densely flown area, also compared to the area compared to North America, Asia Pacific. So we are in the same ballpark in terms of fuel consumption. In Europe, it's very dense, and it's close, very close to the Middle East, North Africa region. So on top of that, we know that Europe at least has the ambition to be a leading part globally and to lead the way by example. So somehow also starting this business is very interesting. On the next one is again about the cake and whether you like the part of the cake which you may get doing projects for Europe. And here I added, besides what we've seen before, the percentages, which are reflected here as well, but you may look also in the tons, in fact, 1 million tons, which are there on the regulatory side, and we'll talk about the voluntary market in a second as well. But roughly 1 million tons is 2025 target. And the situation right now is actually that there is, for now, rather a direction of an oversupply, partially, so pressure on the prices. And obviously the question is on the midterm, how this will develop further. We saw a lot of projects coming. They are less complex and complicated to do than the e-fuel projects. So somehow there is also a bit of a market risk on the only SAF side if you perform on that direction. However, it's an important market for now. On the SAF, and we've seen that, it kicks in from 2030. However, roughly, according to latest projection out of the kind of, actually it's rather more 600,000 rather than 500, the share, there is roughly half of it covered with projects which are for now, can I say, averaged in the probability that they will happen. So somehow there is right now a market opportunity, even in the start of the projects, which can deliver by 2030. And we heard, if you haven't started a project now, you need to hurry very fast to be by 2030. But also the following years, you see that the quota increases to 2%, and then really the big jump to 5% in 2035. So here is obviously no restriction on the biomass side, which we saw is maybe an issue, especially when the volumes grow. But the renewables is the topic. And maybe I should say we had last year the Intersolar here in Europe, and I think a nice message really was that it took 68 years to produce or to deploy 1 terawatt of solar. And until 2022, from the first the commercialization in the Bell Labs, and another 2 years to get to the second terawatt, and it will be 1 terawatt per year in the coming years from 2930 onwards. So solar is one of the major pillars of the renewable growth, and there is such dynamics still behind that is a very credible growth. So somehow this feedstock, at least, seems to be quite credible. We've talked already about EU, and I don't want to deep dive in this slide. You'll have it in the attachments anyway. But what I want to show here is that the things right now are really happening in terms of implementing rules, regulations, reporting, quantification. It's something which is right now on. And we had also the Delegated Act for low carbon fuels just coming out last week. So things are now kind of defined. And that's also something about investments. When you know things are defined, things are, how can I say, also de-risked in a way on regulation. This helps a lot to move your projects towards final investment decision. This one we have seen already, and I will not deep dive, just showing a little bit, and there are different scenarios you can find from various research institute, but the yellow one, the SAF, starts small, but gets an important share, maybe 50% of the share, some say, over time, and it's a very interesting path, especially when you are strong in the resources needed for it, and we'll come to that in a second. The ecosystem for hydrogen projects is even not included here, or the ecosystem to do production. Really, this is the ecosystem when you deal with fuels, with aviation fuels. And this shows a little bit that these projects, especially the early mover projects, need a very complete approach, because usually we're talking, due to the sizing about large-scale projects, and you need to take into account all involved parties, which need to be in the project. Not everybody needs to be part directly of the project, but you need to be sure that what you're doing and what you're delivering and what you're transporting meets the requirements of those which are involved in the whole setup. When the project gets mature or the market gets mature, this will be easier. But right now, you can take, in this case, for the SAF, potentially even a first mover advantage, as we saw. You have also some disadvantages for sure. But in this case, you can really shape a little bit corporations right now. One project, which is really a lighthouse initiative, let's call it, rather than just a project, is the SAF project, Sky Power. And this project is really intended to have the core decision makers and know-how companies involved, and to define what is really needed to make SAF work, and to put their own knowledge inside, and with that do the right, how can I say, both work on the policy side, but also give support in setting up such ecosystem as I showed before, and also setting key parameters to hit. And happy to say that Smart Energy is part of this project together with many others. Don't know. I just mentioning two, for example, as right now last week we had the SAF summit in Amsterdam, where we have been also one of the main sponsor. But Topso was presenting, for example, a great new technology, even increasing efficiency towards what we know today. Stoff 2, a German, just to put up the Germans one time, a nice project innovation to combine storage into the hydrogen electrolyzer itself, even without the need of batteries. So very interesting things ongoing, and which will improve the case. The SAF market drivers, the voluntary market, as I mentioned before, is something very essential to also take into account, and also here, and it goes back to the topic, the people want to fly. Some have never flown and want to fly in future. And if they can do it clean, the passenger numbers accordingly will increase. And according to that, there's many schemes integrated in European, but also Middle East aviation companies, which are done both in terms of testing, but also in terms of schemes for the passengers to really be able to easily decarbonize their flights, choose on SAF, making some contributions, deciding whether it's a long or short-term support, which then goes into the price. So Lufthansa or Swiss, just to take two, then or Air France KLM, obviously, to just really mention the big ones in Europe, among others. And then obviously Emirates and others have done great initiatives for SAF. So there is clearly the evidence that the players are moving, they're investing, and they are preparing for this market, and it's kind of the right moment to be part of it. Looking into some figures, you can see here that the SAF offtake agreements, and we know it a lot from the hydrogen projects, that the off-taking side, not only we know is key, but then to really make it happen and to have commitments which are binding is easy. With the and now we come back to the first moment, but disadvantage, some wait. It may be cheaper if you commit later. But interesting to see on the SAF side that this doesn't seem to be so strongly the case as it has been in hydrogen. On the contrary, there's quite some volume which has been gone through offtake agreements by all the big players. So there is already the concern whether you can really match the targets, and we've seen the penalties before, which you may get, plus the voluntary market. So in order to secure their operations in future and secure their ability to be in line, both the aviation, the fuel companies, fuel purchasers, but also the fuel producers, obviously those matches them together at the same volume, make the agreements happen. So we are talking about real things happening. Mostly right now it's SAF, and I'll be focusing a bit now also on eSAF, because the eSAF side is the one we focus with our renewable energies as well from Smart Energy side. Some lighthouse projects, also just highlighting a few which are advanced in their developments. Solaric project, Elise project in France, Terrel, the other one in Terrel, Spain, NG Kerosene project in Le Havre, Vara Rotterdam. Actually, there is another slide I could present, which would include, in fact, the in-air attack we heard that passed FID, or NorSAF in Latvia. So project happening with substantial volumes, but still not covering even this apparently small 1.2% in 2030, which is interesting to see what the potential even such a small percentage has, which increases to 5% in 5 years. So you can imagine if you're 1 year later already, it's 2% instead of 1.2%. Okay, looking into some project setups, and we were happy to present this also last week in Amsterdam. by my colleagues. We are having 2 projects in Portugal setting up the supply side for SAF. One is close to the airport of Porto, with a great setup for also the logistics, also with the partner REN. And you see also substantial volume, substantial PV for you in European scale. I know in Middle East, you rather try to catch the gigawatt always, if possible. Well, not everybody can do it right away, but there are several projects around now. But the 390 megawatt in Europe is already a solar megawatt peak is a very substantial project. And the good thing is you reach a scale where if your production becomes decent in terms of the cost and the processes, you cannot go too small. Also, the very important topic is we don't have the waste or the biomass. We need the CO2 and, if possible, the biogenic CO2, although there's some exemption until some time. So this is managed in this project through the ceramic industry and further partners which are part of this project. The similar project, which even has a longer history, is a Galileo project close to the Lisbon airport. Similar topic, even larger, PV 760 megawatt peak with corresponding H2 output and an SAF production of 155,000 tons. Also here, the setup of being close to an airport, having the logistics, having the partners on board, and having the CO2 source. And as you can see on the bottom, Simpor, the cement industry, as you know, cement kind of 10% of emissions in the global percentage, is one of the industry with a lot of topics. So initially there is exemption. You can take the CO2 until a certain time for the next kind of 15 years. Until then, you have to switch to more biogenic, but also these industries are switching. All right, but jumping now to MENA and how this relates to EU. And there is, and obviously I cannot put all the countries in one slide, but just a few ones which catched our attention. Morocco, Egypt, Qatar, Oman, UAE, Saudi Arabia, all with hydrogen strategies. And with that, also with SAF strategies, both SAF and partially SAF strategies. Looking into that, it's kind of interesting to see that there is Morocco, as we know, one solar champion since the royal family had put the decrees out to really go into hydrogen and SAF production with their resources, the sun and the wind. Similar in Egypt. Qatar is obviously very known for the aviation industry and the airline, and committed to use 10% SAF by 2030. Oman, similar, very active with large-scale projects for the size of the country. UAE, obviously very committed to produce also 700 million liters of SAF annually by 2030. And Saudi Arabia as well. So there is the dynamics we looked into Europe, also in MENA happening. And the advantage of MENA is that it is suitable not only for the own needs, which greatly is there as well, but also for the export side, because we wouldn't imagine that Europe, maybe they're produced for themselves, they don't have the transport, but given that their natural resources, sun, wind, are less optimal, they will not export to MENA. So meaning MENA has the opportunity to do projects where you can base yourself on both parts, export and using it also for yourself. There is SAF initiatives, and we saw also just before by Frank their engagement into one project. I put here some others, and I said it's not a complete list, but there is a large-scale green hydrogen development in Morocco, OCP Group's renewable ammonia program, but also looking into potentially extending to SAF. There is in Qatar biofuel projects. There is even supply agreements and partnerships with airlines on the go or already signed. Egypt also very strong hydrogen targets. I'll talk about some experiences there. But it's for sure a strategy of the country to engage and to support hydrogen and derivatives, because in fact to have a business case leading into the future value creation, the import-export balance. Then we have obviously also Master, ADNOC topics, not going through all of them. Now for timing, we can discuss in a second, Oman, Red Sea, Saudi Aramco. So all projects which are relevant to SAF happening right now. The CO2 topic, the biogenic, with the exemption initially and then fully biogenic, is one of the key topics to solve when you do eSAF projects. And obviously in MENA there is CO2 available, a lot of it. And just to put a few examples, in the oil and gas industry, cement industry, as mentioned before, petrochemical, chemical industry, steel and iron industry, power generation. A lot of opportunities to team up when you have a site to think about, to think about the sourcing of CO2 when you do eSAF projects. Yeah, for timing, I just go on for now and come also to some, I think, interesting details, analysis, which you may not have seen before. Luckily, the price or the cost I put here kind of goes a bit in line with what you've seen before, and also Frank said, looking into the future and looking into the scaling of eSAF, the cost, which right now we saw the SAF times 2 to times 7 or times 10 even, of the conventional one, has a big potential to come down. And coming down would mean, in fact, if you take great conditions, ideal conditions, even in Iberia, you could manage to get to a level which is below 5,000 euro per ton in the cost side. I'm not talking about the price and the market mechanisms on top, but this is really all cost in. And if you look into it, the electricity cost is the top topic. Then comes H2 production, eSAF production, other sale of byproducts, for example, oxygen, heat. And then last but not least, the potential of the subsidy, which is scaled in. And what I took here was taking into account what is the effect of the subsidies in Europe. And we know that there has been the first hydrogen bank auction, which was awarded to 7 companies. 6 kept going for now, with 0.48 kilogram per kilogram H2, euro per kilogram H2. And the sensitivity analysis shows also that not only at that level, it's not a very substantial reduction of the cost, between 5-ish and a bit more %. But also if you increase the subsidy, for example, from kind of 50 cents, euro cents to 1 euro, the reduction of the cost of jet fuel, levelized cost of jet fuel, would go down another kind of 200 euro a ton. So it not fully changing, and it's not very credible that it goes even 1 euro or more in subsidies. So let's say on terms of market, when you consider where you can get in MENA with production in Europe, the subsidies for sure will not make the case for MENA potentially difficult, even not in the beginning with the subsidies. That's a bit the message I wanted to give you here. Looking into an analysis we did with a project setup, which we calculated, but as a more qualitative analysis, not now sharing exactly one specific project. You see that in Iberia, and looking into the sensitivity of the LCOJ, the jet fuel cost, electricity capex, other OPEX, CO2, and other, that obviously electricity, as you know from hydrogen already, is core and key. Capex is important, but second order, also no surprise. The CO2 is important and has also some sensitivity, but the availability is key, a bit less the cost, which obviously plays still a role. But now what happens if you put a little bit more MENA parameters in? also in terms of sun and wind resources. You get to a lower sensitivity in the project. If you then look into what's the most sensitive, you see that electricity cost is then less sensitive. You anyway have a very good situation. So capex and also CO2 cost become even more important. So Europe solving the electricity is the top one. MENA, assuming you have a very good renewables opportunity with land and sun and wind, the capex and CO2 gets even to a higher importance, where potentially you have also good situation. And looking a bit even deeper right now, and I think I try to keep time also for discussion, so we're going a bit fast now. Iberia, including fees, very important, and this again, it's a project concept. You can see that the OPEX and CAPEX change, how they are resulting into a different SCOJ. Obviously, the sensitivity on the OPEX is much stronger. You see on 5% scale changes here, how it works, while the CAPEX is also important, but a bit less. Also good to know that there is specifics in Europe, and this kind of electricity mix is important. And once you reach the 90% in the grid, you have easier situation in Europe, because then you, by the Delegated Act rules, you are already taking green electricity. So capex optimization is needed for competitive cost, but the electricity mix is the key. For MENA, you see here the same chart. However, you are at a different level. And now, very important that I say that, not only written here, this excludes fees and transport. And while above Iberia, it's all in. I put this here because I don't know, and I cannot put it right for every country, what are exactly the fees and transport. Transport a bit is not too surprising, but the fees depends on the policy, on the various stakeholders, how much you take. So with that, you can kind of think what is the margin you have to stay competitive if a country defines on how much fees are taken by the grid and various other services, water and other things. I will potentially jump this one, except on the sub-policy changes for the right-hand side. On the left, we heard a lot, and there's needs MENA and EU alignment. But which, when I go to the right, there is the Directorate General MENA specifically to develop and support such projects with Commissioner Dubravka-Šuica, and their role is strategic diplomatic engagement, policy dialogue and agreements, development and technical assistance, cross-DG coordination, and regional energy diplomacy investment facilitation. And now you may ask, okay, but this is not covering really also the aspects of a project. In fact, because they shall help coordinating with the various entities of the European Commission and directorates engaged, and that's on the next slide. You can see here the responsibilities for key SAF activities. So we have DG Move, and I mentioned before the aviation director, setting the SAF blending mandates. You have the certification of the SAF imports handled by DG ENA, DG Klima, negotiating the trade deals, DG Trade, and funding infrastructure directly through the EIB, DG INPA, or other initiatives. So just to give you a view that there is quite some people involved, but DG MENA shall help to find through the I don't want to say negatively bureaucratic jungle. So it's rather the various competences in Europe. Challenges to overcome. Also here I keep it short. You can read the details later, but it's not a big surprise for FIDs, regardless MENA, Europe, that you have to deal with the financial, operational, strategic, and political risks. Showing a little bit, and that's the last one, I deep dive a bit on that slide, is that we had done a project concept in Egypt. You know that there has been a very strong initiative for hydrogen, also together when there was the COP in Sharm el-Sheikh. And we also joined the club of companies engaging, making a concept, having this qualified with the major entities. and just showing some rough values of the concept, which at that time, I'm not saying this is the real project right now. So we did quite some calculations, and you could then do hydrogen, but obviously for export, ammonia was the first choice. Methanol alternatives, you need also CO2, but also you could convert to SAF, as we saw also in the Morocco case. So this is all potential derivation of a project which is gigawatt scale, if it would be like that. And with that, a huge investment. And to the quick experiences, maybe also something for the conversation which we will have. Obviously, it's a great ambition, but in fact, the entities involved also, while doing this, also step by step discovered also the challenges, not only doing such huge project, but also coordinating various players and understanding, obviously, also the limitation. For example, the grid was a topic where to source jointly the water, land allocation. So things they initially thought are set, going deeper proved to be difficult to really do. And with that, obviously, for such a project, we are then not in the position like 2 years ago when there was assumptions and these change. Then you need to restart again the efforts to go towards FID steps. Yeah, not yet being close at that very moment, but just to say, one of the experiences really is, okay, who is in charge? Does he really know? Are there all entities connected? And we saw all the stakeholders before. Okay, so I think I will skip this slide a bit, saying you need a setup of a project which needs a project leadership. We try to do that. We have topics about how to set up an SPV, just an example, how we usually think it's a good idea. And then we have here, obviously very important, the jobs created for such a project in terms of this sizing, which is very, very important, not only short-term and long-term. And last but not least, this is when I'm dreaming, I make things very easy. So here the sun is kind of powering the solar impulse, which also landed in MENA, by the way. And did around the world trip just with solar. And actually, these projects just convert kind of solar and wind. And obviously, CO2 you need as well, but straight to fuel. So it's actually a nice imagination that this is the future for a big, important part of the decarbonization of aviation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your presentation. Now we'll move on to the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Frank Wouters. And we will be mainly discussing how the MENA can potentially position itself in this emerging SAF market. I will ask all the participants to put their questions, please, in the chat so that we may ask the questions once Frank finishes from his questions first. Thank you, Frank.
Yes, thank you, Tawfiq. And to add to the confusion, we'll have two Franks in the Q&A. But I guess you can keep us apart because this one doesn't have hair. Frank has a beautiful, head of hair. Let me start with you, Frank. SAF is, of course, it goes into a plane, and then there is passengers. Can you reflect a little bit on the willingness of them to pay a green premium? Are there parallels with other industries that we can learn from?
Well, you may know that some airlines tried it, and so if you now book a ticket at Lufthansa, for instance, but many other airlines as well, you have the option to offset. And you usually have two ways. You can have an offset like planting trees somewhere, but also to buy SAF. And according to Lufthansa, there are only very few clients that do that. But there's a much higher demand from corporate customers that wish to offset their scope 1 emissions. And so that like Apple, for instance, or other kind of big manufacturers. So there's much higher chance. And I think there's a lot of demand there. And I think this is also why the voluntary targets are much higher than the obligatory especially for logistics airlines like DHL, which has a 10% SAF target for 2030.
Yeah, Frank, to just jump in fact, the corporate side and travel policies, I really expect that step by step this will become a standard almost for every company doing business with other companies in order to be compliant with the ESG requirements and everything, not only for your own footprint. So as you said, the individual backpacker maybe doesn't take the extra. But from the corporate side, I'm very positive, actually, including our company, for example. It's a policy we have to take that.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, there's, again, often we see that where there's an aspiration and people are aware, maybe they're not aware enough, but at least there is some concern with, emissions, etc. But then when they have to pay, it becomes a little bit more complex. Christian, we see globally, especially in this year with this trade war going on, and also a physical war, which requires, especially in Europe, defense budgets to go up, etc. So there's a growing number of priorities beyond decarbonization. Where do we get the money from for all of this?
Mm-hmm. So one thing I always think about when you see this kind of very strong variations and expectations based on policy happening, and one example right now would be the stock exchange. If you look what happened, it went crazy down and suddenly they're up again, and then you come back to the old truth. Look at the long-term perspective, and it will go the way which is the needed and best way. So somehow it also applies to this type of projects, which are long-term projects where you invest into, but over time there is a necessity, as we've seen. There is no, I really say, believing in aviation, meaning there needs to be SAF, and with the SAF there will be a market. So in a way, I don't believe too much that the money needed is kind of covered by subsidies in the end. Maybe we need these lighthouse projects and things happening. And we saw also in the sensitivities before that even on a OPEX support, not only the CAPEX, but on a OPEX support, the lever is not as substantial as you would believe. So it's important to make the whole thing fly, but setting up the project in the right place with the right approach is even more important. So I think, yes, the money seems a bit less available these days. There's security topics in first priority and other, obviously, competitiveness topics. But we talk about projects which take years to develop. And on the longer term, I said there's variations, but who knows what's next year, the year after. But still, the decarbonization will become even more stringent. Luckily, we'll see the climate will really hit us more and more. And with that, I think the awareness for this topic will come back on the next big crisis, unluckily, which is probably not too far out from now.
Yeah, thanks for that. Frank, when we're then discussing the how-tos, we've discussed, what industry can do, what the public sector can do. What are good policies to make these work? I mean, you mentioned carrots and sticks, or I think it was Christian or you, but what are good policies to make this work?
Yeah, well, I'm quite a big fan of the EU regulation bringing this certainty for the next 25 years. You know exactly the trajectory. Some say this jumps for 2030, 2035. It's not ideal. You would prefer having kind of a continuous increase and not from one day to the next kind of tripling your SAF. So that could be discussed. It's clearly understood by the EU that those targets are not sufficient, that they need to support a bit the first movers. So I expect in this Sustainable Transport Investment Plan some CAPEX or kind of instruments like H2 Global dedicated to aviation. Something will come that was quite clear after a little bit of a showdown meeting earlier this year with the Lufthansa and Ryanair CEOs. But they are very clear that the targets will stay, and I think this is accepted by the industry. I'm also kind of a big fan of not looking only at individual projects and supporting them, but more looking at the entire market. What we are doing now that has little to do with MENA, but could be kind of replicated in MENA, that we work with lots of different companies in Brazil that all want to produce methanol as a kind of an intermediate product to then produce methanol to jet.
Which they already do, I guess, because they've been making methanol for decades.
Yes, ethanol, yeah, but now methanol.
Yes, of
yes, methanol. So, and what we're trying to do is to give some market certainty to it. So talk with the governments, the Brazilians, the Europeans, attach that to the free trade agreement of the Mercosur, be clearer on all the regulatory framework and so on and so forth, be sure that there's trust in the market, that the producers and the recipients, say a refinery in Europe to do then the refining to methanol to jet, they grow at the same time, that the infrastructure is in place and all of this. So to really make this very complex step that we had the luxury for oil and gas to use 50 years or longer for it within a very short time span. And if we do that for a kind of one region, build that market, it's very kind of easy, but we can use this experience to then adapt it maybe to other regions, and the MENA region, I think, is perfect for such an arrangement with Europe.
Thank you, Christian. What are good policies for you as a developer?
The thing I would say, number one, not too complex, not taking too much time to really make it happen. So bureaucracy really, and this may be a personal comment first. While you try to make it perfect, you get to a level which then makes things hard. But on the other hand, having things defined, clear, and no doubts anymore is as important. So it's obviously difficult, I know, but in the attempt to make things predictable, defined, make it as simple as possible, and also practical. Sometimes imposing targets too early or making it too strict too early, as we see in some regulations also for hydrogen, which when the whole thing is not even taking off, this can be difficult. So let's say while the longer term goal is the right one and to define it right is perfect, but take into account the reality of developers, of investors. They need to, especially the first movers, have some how can I say, de-risking and some advantages. Otherwise, they just wait as everybody else.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. We've seen the cost gap, right? ESAP maybe factor 10. How can we close that cost gap as quickly as possible without spending too much subsidy money?
Right. But first of all, I think we need a fair comparison. So now we always compare conventional aviation fuel with sustainable aviation fuel, ignoring that sustainable aviation fuel are actually three products, right? So it's jet fuel, it is scope 1 and scope 3 emissions that comes with cost as well, right? And the conventional aviation fuel also comes with the cost if it enters the emission trading system or any carbon tax that we hopefully see in more countries in the future. So maybe by this already the cost gap is closing. Well, I think Christian and I said it now time and again, there is a lot of interest in the market. There's a lot of dynamic. And we both were in Amsterdam. There's a lot of technology, a lot of kind of creativity, but this needs to be unlocked. And it's in our interest to really push the market and de-risk the first plants, the first projects, so that they very, very quickly get to construction and then production. And that will facilitate a lot other players to come in and then compete. Right now we have, as Christian on one slide showed, maybe even the risk of having too much supply for maybe that brings me back to my increase of the targets. Maybe they are too low until 2030, and everyone's waiting. I don't know. Christian, are you waiting for until 2030 until you start new plans? Because then there is no mandatory offtake. So maybe it would be better to have a gradual increase to it. But that's a kind of topic that we already discussed.
Yeah. No,
but it's a good point. I mean, oversupply is great for pricing, not for the one who has the oversupply, but for the market.
Exactly.
Christian, what's your view on this? I mean, how can we close the cost gap, even after, of course, externalities which are not priced?
As I'm the CTO, obviously my first answer now is technology.
But good to say that there is an important aspect.
There is really potential, and it goes not only into the scaling side, but also there is innovation. Once you really do things and you invest the corresponding money, you are surprised how much is possible. I mean, we saw it, and it's said 10,000 times, but still saying it again, the PV, nobody had expected in 2010, for example. I was already in solar at that time as well. And then 15 years later, we dropped by 90 to 95% in cost. Or wind also dropped in cost by 60, 70%, depending whether offshore or onshore. So we know that electricity is the number one topic for the fuel side. And here actually comes our webinar in a very good topic, because the advancements which we have in renewables in terms of efficiency, scaling, goes in a very big portion into the cost of the SAF, which you may then have. Well, I'm not talking about the bio side, which is also important, because there is the threat that maybe there is either also a supply or also even the food stock may become limited. So on the SAF side, you have a very predictable development over time. You can calculate very big accuracy the cost you will have in future. I mentioned the fees topic. So that's one of the experiences then in Middle East, which we had kind of, this is a big thing. Everybody can get piece of cake again, but too many want too much of the cake, and suddenly you come up with a setup which is not competitive, and the cost gap is not even closing by going from MENA, for example, but it's even higher, which was then the result. So you have to revisit. So somehow not to be too greedy. The important thing is the market takes off, and there is volumes coming, and the margins will then allow on the longer term to profit the country. So I think that to bridge the cost gap, the countries involved doing such projects, they should invest into their future and not think that with the first projects they can make their money right away. It's tempting, but not my recommendation.
Yeah, thanks. And maybe just a follow-up question along what you were just saying. I mean, there is, a global trade war ongoing. It seems to have relaxed somewhat again yesterday, and I don't know, maybe tomorrow it accelerates again. You don't know. And we do see that there is nervousness for people to make investments, especially when you talk about supply chains, value chains, etc. What's your take in very concrete terms on this? Will we see a lot of nearshoring, homeshoring? Will this actually, incentivize local production also of equipment in the countries that you do your projects? Christian, this was for you.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking on the question on the chat. Sorry for that. If you could shortly repeat. Sorry, I was not following.
So my question is
Frank.
with the trade war ongoing that goes up and down, and there is a reconsideration of people making investments in supply chain and physical equipment. You also mentioned, especially in the MENA, people want to make more equipment, extend value chains at home. Is that a factor? What do you see in the market?
Yes, that's a big topic. Thank you that you asked me. I mean, already when we talked about hydrogen project in the MENA region, now SAF goes even on top because there's even more equipment. the potential of capex reduction by corporations, local production. Even I know that there is more openness in the region for approaches of licensing of technologies and then doing it with local workforces, which obviously European also need then to consider to match it, but coming from other countries, including China. By the way, this openness to do such models will give the region cost advantages. And with this trade topic, which is mainly, or can I say, triggered by US, for sure there is alternative developing in the mind and in the planning now to even increase this effort. Still again, I'm not sure how long we should consider this trade war in US going on like it is right now. So you never know, but for sure it already triggered, okay, safe is safe. Maybe we already consider this alternative where you can really have capex cost advantages and have other supply chains which you can, by mutual agreement, make the best trade agreements possible to get this starting on the mutual benefit of both sides and both parties. So I think it's a very big trigger right now and triggering a lot of planning different than if we didn't have the trade war.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. In view of the time, I guess we're sort of at the last question. You mentioned, when we talked about the cost gap, that we're not comparing apples to apples. How important is a price on carbon?
Oh, very important. You said it at the beginning. No, I'm quoting yourself. Is the carbon price in Europe is 14 times too low? I learned from you today. And
16
we have
actually, but yeah.
How much?
16. It's about
16.
It's $81 compared to 13.67. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now I was so proud that I listened to you, but not carefully enough. Okay, 16 times. And we don't build it in. And so absolutely it has to happen. But unfortunately, we're dealing here with a global industry, and no one wants to kill the European industry to the detriment, and the airlines around Europe then flourish. No one wants to have this, so it has to be careful. I would love to see an IMO moment at ICAO with kind of a stronger way forward to 2050. But absolutely needed. I hope that's registered by more and more people now.
Thank you. Well, Tufik, over to you. I would like to thank, of course, our two panelists for excellent contribution and great Q&A.
Thank you.
Yep. Do you want to finish with any takeaways, closing remarks, or that would be it?
Happy to do so. I learned a lot. Actually, Christian, one thing that I heard this morning, because you had on your slide, the UAE on it, that there is some, some thinking, etc. But one of the things that somebody from the ministry said in a workshop this morning was that they are actually working really hard on quotas also in the UAE. And that, it's complex because, as you also showed in several slides, it's always a multi-stakeholder kind of thing that's here. It's the Aviation Authority, the Ministry of Finance, it's the Ministry of Energy, etc., yada, yada, yada. But he seemed pretty positive that there will be also a SAF quota in the UAE, and obviously with the major airlines here, that's a big driver. So that's good news. What I learned is, it's an unavoidable thing. So the question is just how big is the train? That's left the station. How big is it, and how fast will it ride? I also learned that the stakeholder engagement, especially at this point in time when we're still we're building a new product and it's a new market. So you also have to consider that you do have to engage with a multitude of stakeholders, which is crucial to move forward. The European example was also enlightening with the various directorates general that all need they probably all have different opinions, different views, but they all need to align and in the end move in the same direction. It was an interesting discussion about early mover, yes or no. The funny thing is that we have this dynamic. We know 1.2% in 2030. That's actually a big number. It sounds small, but it's big, and people are still reluctant to make that investment. But 2030, it's you have to start now for it to be there in 2030. So I'm hopeful that we saw these early movers. Early movers also have an advantage. I mean, it's risky, but the advantage is we've seen that in other things that you do lock in supply chains, and you become part of an ecosystem, and later on it might be more difficult to get into the club. That's very often what you see with early movers. So it's not just a risk; it can also sometimes be an advantage. And then lastly, I heard about what you need in terms of policies. They have to be certain. This is something that we've heard in the last couple of months often and often, or more from many more people. So certainty is important. Simplicity, I like that, and it needs to be done faster, ideally. So, and that also ties into the certainty, because the quicker you agree on something, whether it's good or bad, at least you know what it is, and you can actually move on that. So with that, I would really like to thank our contributors. I would like to thank the audience. I see that we still have more than 60 people that have stuck with us. We will make our presentations available for you. And thank you for your attendance today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.